policy is largely designed around how states perceive themselves in the world and how they perceive others. And this is something which helps explain the moral limits, the moral poverty of liberalism, which has been critiqued by many realists, John Mearsheimer, most notably, in this day and age. But I think that one of the biggest assumptions that liberalism operates on is what you had just said, is that liberalist states operate within an understanding of moral righteousness. And how do they justify that? They simply say that they are doing the greater good. Right? They can't point to empirical evidence. They don't have statistics. At best, they can point to past patterns of foreign policy. The United States will frequently point to its involvement in the First and Second World Wars. The United States operates on a narrative, and it's a rather potent narrative, that we're the good guys. And we may not start wars, but we end wars. We end wars started by morally unrighteous countries, whether they happen to be from the extreme right or the extreme left. And it's an echo chamber that is frequently repeated through American media, through education, through pop culture. And it's not necessarily specific to the United States. It operates within the UK, it operates within the European Union, and I think that it is most prominently displayed right now in what is really the remnants of the EU attempting to keep the good fight in Ukraine going after Donald Trump has basically thrown Ukraine under the bus, which many of us who study this, many of us in the realist camp and the constructivist camp, knew that it was really a matter of time before Ukraine had served its purpose for American interests, and it eventually would either be defunded or just simply abandoned. The European Union feels that it must keep this mantle of struggle against a perceived enemy going. And let's be perfectly honest here. The perception of Russia as the aggressor country is pretty obvious, considering that it was Russia that invaded another country. So right there, the narrative is written effectively for everybody else. But when it becomes apparently obvious that the war is not winnable from the Ukrainian side, or that Western support for this country has done little more than keep it alive for 2 to 3 weeks at a clip, and that Ukraine is unfortunately undergoing internal political change that becomes more and more reminiscent of an ethnocentric state than an all multi-ethnic inclusive one, kind of lays hollow the narrative of this liberalist moral righteousness, especially when these very same countries are turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to other crimes against humanity that's happening around the world, most notably within the Gaza Strip, in which, and I'm just going to come flat out and say, I mean, we are basically talking about the most brazen case of state-sponsored genocide since the Second World War. And these very liberalist countries that claim to defend Ukraine at all costs are doing everything possible to prevent any open criticism, any open protest against the state of Israel. So, my point here is to simply note that all it takes is just an empirical observation of states that operate on the liberalist perspective, and you begin to realize that the narrative sounds nice, but it ultimately does little more than advance national interests of states who believe that what they do is somehow morally better, more superior than what China or Russia or Iran or India or Serbia does.